remember. Oh, God, you scared me.
Babe, have you seen my hemorrhoid cream? Oh no!
This is such a serious video.
Oh no!
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking all about anxiety. So in a recent pregnancy update, I had touched on the subject of anxiety, and a lot of you guys said that you would be interested in seeing a full video about it. So that's what today's video is. So if you're interested in my story with anxiety, then just keep watching. So this video is probably going to be pretty lengthy, so definitely grab a snack. I'm going to try to make it as concise as possible. This is actually my second time filming it because the first time was so just rambly. So in today's video, I'm going to give you guys a background on kind of my history with anxiety, what my struggles with anxiety are, how my anxiety has changed throughout pregnancy, and then just some tips and tricks I do to help manage my anxieties. So let me give you guys a background on my anxiety. Let's go back to the beginning. About 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with general anxiety and trauma-induced anxiety. And this was something that I had dealt with for a very, very long time before ever going to a doctor. So I was diagnosed 4 years ago, but it was something I've struggled with for a lot longer. I'm not going to talk too much about the general anxiety, at least prior to pregnancy. I'm going to touch more on my history with the trauma-induced anxiety because that's the one that's really has been and continues to be the primary issue for me. Trauma-induced anxiety is just like it sounds. There was some sort of trauma or incident in my life that gives me anxiety in like similar situations. Long story short, 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. Many of you guys know this. If you aren't familiar with it, it means I cannot physically digest gluten. It damages my intestines. I can't process it. My body rejects it. It's like I can't have it. But I was sick for about 5 years prior to that diagnosis. And being sick, I dealt with a lot of stomach issues. And those stomach issues are what led to my trauma-induced anxiety. So this was going on in high school and college. I got my celiac disease diagnosis a few months after graduating college. So as you can imagine, high school and college are very social times. I'm out with my friends a lot. We're doing things. We're going out to dinner. And this is in the heat of me having these stomach issues. It's going to be TMI, but I might as well just say it. I was having horrendous diarrhea episodes multiple times a week. These episodes weren't just like normal, you go to the bathroom, you're good. It was like a process where it was multiple trips to the bathroom, or I was spending an hour or more in the bathroom. And as you can imagine, as a high school and college student, this is a very embarrassing situation to be in because you're like, you don't want people to know what's going on. So I was put in these situations quite often, and because of it, I developed an anxiety about it. So my trauma-induced anxiety started with me being afraid of going places, of going on long car rides, of going on vacations, of going out to dinner for fear that one of these episodes would happen. And it was a legitimate fear because they were happening so often and they were horrible. And so I developed an anxiety about social situations, leaving my home, going on trips, restaurants. I developed a big anxiety around food in public in general because I didn't realize at the time, but so many of my episodes were happening around food because the food was the source of the problem. So I would be getting these horrible episodes happening in food situations. And so I then developed anxiety about those situations. And so the way my anxiety manifests is primarily in the form of nausea. So I would go out to dinner, for example, and would have such an anxiety about getting sick that I would then make myself feel sick. I would make myself feel really nauseous. And sometimes I would have that on top of the other issues going on. And so that's kind of how it started, was just I would be going out in places and feel nauseous and make myself kind of stressed that it was going to happen. And like, what do I do? Where's the bathroom? Like, what's my plan? All of these things were happening. So then fast forward, I get my celiac disease diagnosis. It takes your body about 6 months to fully recover once you stop eating gluten. So after about 6 months of my diagnosis, I never had another traumatic episode like I was having again, because I was healed. It literally was life-changing. I was healed, never had an experience like that again. But because I had had so many, my brain had then learned to be anxious about these situations. Even though it no longer was happening, I still was having these anxious thoughts and this nausea and these feelings when I would go out to a restaurant, when I would do something that like I wouldn't want it to happen in. Even though it's not happening anymore, those feelings were still happening. And for a long time, it was just that I just felt anxious. It never went to a full-blown panic attack until one time it did. Like I said, my triggers were often like things that were important to me, places I didn't want it to happen, and restaurants. And I had my first full-blown panic attack on Ben and I's 1-year anniversary in a restaurant. If you have ever had a panic attack, you know how horrible it is, but everyone's panic manifests in different ways. So a lot of people have panic attacks and they feel like they can't breathe. That's not something that happens to me. So my primary symptom when I have a panic attack is the overwhelming urge to throw up. So it goes past just the feeling of feeling nauseous. It's like, no, I'm going to throw up. If I allow myself, like, I'll throw up. You know the feeling if you've ever thrown up and like when you know you have to throw up, it's that feeling. So that's my primary side effect when I go into a full-blown panic attack. But I also get really hot, which is a common symptom. I get really shaky. I get this kind of numb feeling. The way I describe it is like, it's almost like that feeling of butterflies in your stomach, or if you like go down a roller coaster and it kind of like makes that feeling in your stomach, but it goes from head to toe for me. And that's how I know that it's like panic attack is happening, because I feel this numbness happen literally at the top of my head and roll through my body. Depending on the severity of it, sometimes I get like facial twitches. It's fun. But really the primary one is just this overwhelming feeling of having to throw up. So prior to that night, I had never had a panic attack. And that happened, and that was the moment where I was like, okay, I need to see a doctor about this, because it's now turned into just this anxious feeling to panic in a situation where it really shouldn't, because I have no more issues. So that was, like I said, about 4 years ago. That panic attack has since caused a new form of trauma-induced anxiety. So now I'm not so much afraid of going out to these places and feeling sick, because the panic attacks are so just horrible. I now have developed an anxiety about anxiety. So it's not that I'm now afraid of going to a restaurant for fear of getting sick. It's I now have anxiety of going to a restaurant for fear of having a panic attack, because I've had one before. It's fun. Isn't anxiety fun? It's like, that's like the root of anxiety. Like, I'm anxious about being anxious, which so many of you guys had commented on my video that you're already people that deal with anxiety and you're nervous about what your anxiety is going to turn into when you get pregnant. It's like, you're anxious about being anxious. That is the root of anxiety. I swear that's the root of my anxiety. And so I definitely feel for you guys there. So now my anxiety has turned into, like I said, I have a fear of panic attacks. Since that one, I think I've had maybe 4 or 5 panic attacks total. One of them was on my wedding day. Not a lot of people know this. It literally came out of nowhere, so that's why this one I feel like messed me up so bad, was because I was feeling great that day. I had had anxieties about anxiety prior to the day, but the day of, I felt great. I wasn't thinking about being anxious at all, and it hit me out of nowhere, and it was the worst panic attack I've ever had. I actually threw up, which, going back to even more history about me and my anxiety, I had a ton of anxiety about throwing up. I had a really, really big fear of throwing up. I hadn't thrown up in a really, really long time. Throwing up kind of helped me with that fear. I'm much less afraid of throwing up now. Obviously, it's not fun, but I don't have the like, oh my God, I'm afraid of throwing up thing. It's more of, oh my God, I'm afraid of throwing up because of a panic attack, because it's embarrassing and I don't want people to know I have anxiety. So anyways, so I had one on my wedding day, and since then, that really spawned the anxiety about anxiety for me. So my triggers still are restaurants and food in public, because I have such a history of anxiety with that because I have had a panic attack in a restaurant. Places that I can't easily go home to, because home, as I feel like a lot of people with anxiety know, that home is your safe place. Like, I know some people still have anxiety and panic episodes at home. Knowing that I'm in a situation that I can't easily go home to is a trigger for me. And then also situations that are very important to me where I wouldn't want to be anxious is a trigger for me. So I struggle with having important things come and being afraid of being anxious, which it is. It's like the sole thing of my fear, which is just like a very vulnerable video. Not a lot of people know this about me at all. So the fact that I'm putting on the internet, like, it's kind of crazy. But if there's anything I've learned from sharing my infertility story, it's that sharing your stories is nothing but helpful, because there's a lot of people out there in similar situations. So that's why I'm sharing mine. But I have come to have the anxiety of like not wanting to go somewhere, or having the fear of going somewhere because I don't want to have a panic attack, because it's embarrassing and because I don't want to feel that way in like a special situation, and I don't want people to know that I'm anxious. Which, again, I feel like a lot of people can relate to that with anxiety, is you don't want people to know about it. And so I'm very, very, very familiar with my triggers. And like I said, I've really only had 4 or 5 panic attacks in my life. So the fact that this is like a fear for me is kind of silly, because how many times have I gone out and done things and not had one? But it's still a fear that's there for me. And you don't want to live your life in fear. There's a lot of times where I've seen people do things and I'm like, oh, I couldn't do that because I would be anxious, or I don't think I would want to do that because I'd be afraid of being anxious, kind of things, where it's like, you can't live that way. And so I really, like I said, know my triggers well. And for the most part, have gotten them under control until, I wouldn't say under control. Like, there's anxiety definitely comes in waves. Sometimes you're better, sometimes you're worse. And certain times of year make that change. Certain life events make that change. I feel like if you have anxiety, you're never going to be fully healed of anxiety. It's going to be something you have for life. But there are certainly times that are better. And for a long while, I was doing better. My last panic attack was almost a year ago. It was during times that like things were very stressful. We were going through the infertility. I had a job that was very stressful. And like, I know exactly why I had a panic attack, and it makes sense. I haven't had one since then, yet I still have a fear of having them. So how this kind of turns into pregnancy is, one thing with pregnancy I have realized is that my triggers are being triggered much more easily. And I think it's just because my general anxiety is higher. My hormones are crazy out of whack right now. It's a big life change going on. And I don't want to say this to scare anybody that like your anxiety is going to be worse when you're pregnant, because everybody is different. But for me, my triggers are being triggered much more easily. So for example, I went to dinner with friends recently while pregnant. It was a dinner that normally would not give me anxiety, but this was a situation where I've gone out with these friends many times before, never had an issue. So that's like a thing in my head where I'm like, okay, I can do it. I've been to that restaurant a ton of times and never had an issue, so it's not one that I've had a problem with before. And it just was a situation where I really, knowing me and my anxiety, normally wouldn't have had a problem. But I started to feel those feelings. It didn't go into full-blown panic. Most of the time it doesn't. Like I said, I've had very few actual panic attacks, but I start to get that nauseous feeling. I start to get kind of hot. I just start to get anxious. I want to get out of here, the feeling. And that happened. And I was like, why is this happening? And it happened in another restaurant situation where normally it wouldn't happen. And things like that were just happening more often while pregnant than they normally would. And I don't really have an explanation for it aside from that my anxiety is just higher while pregnant. I also realized that my general anxiety is a lot higher. And general anxiety is something that, for the most part, I don't have much of an issue with anymore. I was having it a lot when I worked in a job where I was just stressed and unhappy. But day to day, that's not something that I've really struggled with. But when pregnant, I realized that my anxiety level every day, even just being at home, just felt so high. It does ebb and flow. It is the middle of winter. I tend to have higher anxiety now, and certain weeks are worse than others, but there was one week there where I was feeling so overwhelmingly anxious, and I had to stop and think about what was making me so anxious. And I'll get into that with like my coping mechanisms or whatever, but I really had to stop and think about it. If anyone has had anxiety, a good way to explain it when you're like in one of these modes where everything is just running through your head is like you're running on a treadmill trying to work, but you have like 15 tabs open while listening to music, watching TV, and trying to read a book. It's like you have like a million things going on at once, and there's like nothing you can do to like make things chill. But there is things you can do. So we'll get into that. So my anxiety while pregnant is higher. I mentioned it to my midwife that I was having a lot more anxiety. And she said that, I think I mentioned this in the video, that anxiety and depression are both very, very common in pregnancy, especially if you are already prone to anxiety, because there's a lot of things that can trigger it. There's a lot of changes going on. And then also your hormones are just crazy. So that can trigger anxiety. A lot of women have never ever experienced anxiety and then have it during pregnancy. Again, I'm not trying to scare you in any way. It's just a common thing. And she said it's difficult during pregnancy because there's not much you can do about it in terms of like medication, because you can't take that while pregnant. And so one of my fears that I realized I was having, and again, this is like very personal information that I'm telling you, was that my anxiety was going to mean that I'm going to have postpartum depression. And I talked to my midwife about it, and she made me feel better in the sense that I told her that I'm having this irrational fear, and she said, okay, well, it's rational in the sense that statistically speaking, you are more likely to have postpartum depression, statistically speaking. And she says, but that's okay. We know that. Thank you for telling me. We'll just watch you more closely. And like, there's so many things we can do if you are experiencing that. She says, unlike in pregnancy, there's so many things that can be done to help you. And she said, the part that's irrational about the fear is that it's going to happen if it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it, and we'll take care of it then. So that kind of made me feel a little bit more at peace, because I'm like, why am I stressing myself over this situation that I don't even know if I'm going to get? And it's not going to change whether I get it or not. So that was one of the big fears I was having. Anxiety is something that I'm probably going to be struggling with throughout the rest of the pregnancy. Again, sometimes things are better than others, but I definitely do know that my anxiety is higher during pregnancy. And so if you are one to struggle with anxiety, it doesn't mean it's going to happen to you, but just know that it could, and be prepared in ways to help yourself. That's where we're going to go now. I took a little break because Ben just got back from Costco with like so many goodies. So now I don't really remember where I was, but I think I was transitioning into things I've done to help myself. So I am in by no means a doctor or an expert on how to deal with anxiety. I struggle with this all the time. And like I said, I probably always will, but there's some things over my years of having it that have found help. And so here are some things that have worked for me, which definitely might not work for everybody, but like it's worth a try, I think. I'm constantly watching videos on YouTube about anxiety coping mechanisms and like how to have a more positive attitude and positive outlook, because when you're anxious, your mind is not positive. There's one YouTuber in general, Kaylin Nicholson, who I'll link her down below, who has just great videos on anxiety and mindset. And she's one who's very, very open with her anxiety. And that's part of the reason why I decided to do it, because I know how much her videos helped me. So if my video can help you in any sort of way, then that's awesome. So for me, especially while pregnant, I realized this. Not only taking the time to like self-reflect and really get to the root of what is making you so anxious is helpful. Like really get down deep inside and think like, what is causing these feelings? What is it that's bothering me, that's worrying me? And then once you've done that, verbalizing them. Verbalizing them makes things, for me, a lot better. It takes these thoughts out of your mind, puts them into real life, which just doing that for me helps a lot, because I'm like, okay, this is what it is that's really bugging me, that's really stressing me. Here it is out loud in the world. It's out of my head, it's out in the world. And talking about them and talking through the fears that you're having is super, super helpful. So for me, thankfully, I have a very supportive spouse who completely understands my anxiety and will talk with me through things. And so when I was having all these anxious thoughts about pregnancy and the things that I was anxious about regarding pregnancy, I talked to him about it, and he made me feel so much better about them. He made me realize that maybe they're not so irrational, or it's okay if it's feeling this way, or we'll deal with this if this happens. So if you have somebody to talk to about them, that's great, whether it be a therapist, a friend, your spouse, whatever. If you don't, writing them can be really helpful. Even just talking to yourself in the shower, like just getting them out into the open real world, I think is really, really helpful. Therapy, I think, is super helpful. It's not something that I have actually done, but I am currently looking into finding a therapist, because I think it could be something that's really, really helpful for me. I've just never done it yet, but I think therapy could be helpful for anybody, even people that don't struggle with anxiety. And then when you are in an anxious state, or you feel a panic attack coming on, or you feel like you're just, those anxious feelings start coming, one thing that took me a really, really, really long time to learn is to accept the feelings and not try to squash them. So how many times have you started feeling these feelings and you're like, oh my God, you're so stupid. Why are you feeling this way? This is so dumb. Like, you're fine. It's okay. Like, why are you doing this to yourself? I've thought those things a million times in the middle of a panic episode or feeling anxiety coming on, telling myself how ridiculous it is, telling myself how dumb it is, telling myself how safe I am, which is the root of it. It's like your body goes into that fight or flight feeling, even though you're fine. But I have found that telling myself those things and like being hard on myself about it does not help. And accepting the feelings and like trying to ride out the feelings makes the anxiety pass more quickly, or makes the anxiety then not turn into a panic episode. Because no matter what, it's gonna end. And that's a hard thing to remember. God, you scared me.
Babe, have you seen my hemorrhoid cream? Oh no.
This is such a serious video.
Oh no.
Oh my God. You'd think I'd be the one being pregnant looking for the hemorrhoid cream. Oh my God. Anyways, that's something you have to remember, is that even though it doesn't feel like it, it will not last forever, especially a panic attack. It does not last forever. And so I found that making it either not happen or pass more quickly is to accept that you're feeling anxious. Accept it, take in your surroundings, like what they call grounding, like realize where you are, take in your surroundings, see things you can see, feel things you can feel, and just like ride out those feelings rather than trying to just push them back, because the more you push it, the more it's going to explode into a worse issue. Sometimes, again, you're in a state where it's just like, that's not working, that's not possible, you're going to be anxious. But I have found that it has helped me keep my anxiety at bay rather than turning into a full-blown situation. And then one other thing is trying to see your anxiety as a challenge. So challenging yourself to do things, for me, it's like, yeah, this social situation is going to be stressful for me because I'm anxious about being anxious, and social situations in general make me anxious. I don't really want to do it. I don't want to go. But doing it and seeing it as a challenge can be helpful, because if you come out on the other side having done it and being fine, then that's a great thing to look back on and tell yourself, you did this, you were okay, and you did it well. Or if you don't do it well, you get anxiety, whatever you're afraid of happens, then that's okay too. And you can look back on it and say, okay, what could I have done to make this situation better? Or what could I have done to prepare myself? Or things like that. So like looking at it, and then when you're successful in these challenges, it makes things feel so much better. And then the last thing is just getting help in whatever way you need. And so if that's medication, then that's okay. I feel like medication is very taboo when it comes to anxiety and mental health, where it's like, there's another video I'll link below, Lauren Elizabeth did on this, where she had said, like, any other part of your body that's broken, if you typically take medication, like, you would take medication. So why is it different when it comes to your mind? Why would you treat your brain differently than any other part of your body. And so I'm not like saying go take medication, but I'm saying is if you've spoken with a doctor and you and your doctor are comfortable with this and think it might be a good route for you, then do it, because there's nothing more important than being happy and healthy. And if medication can help you get that way, then that's great. Like, do that for yourself. And I'm one that I have taken anxiety medication. I was on one every day for a while. I got off that because I realized that my day-to-day anxiety was not so much the trouble. It was the panic type episodes or the really anxious days where I needed something. So since then, I've gotten off of the everyday medication, and I have medication that I take if I'm in a panic attack or I feel like it's a situation where I'm very anxious and I want to prevent it. I have that medication. I'm completely open to saying that I take it, not while pregnant, which I think is another reason that my anxiety is higher during pregnancy, because there's a big comfort in knowing that I have this medication that works for me. So sometimes even just having it in my bag in a situation that might otherwise be very anxiety inducing for me helps suppress that anxiety, because I know I have it if I need it, and I know that I can take it, and I know that it does work. Whereas when I'm pregnant, I can't take it. And so that does stress me out a little bit, because it's like, I'm not reliant on this medication. It's something that I would take very infrequently. I'm talking about like once every few months I might need it. But just knowing I had it is so helpful. And while pregnant, knowing that I don't have that as like help if I need it kind of makes my anxiety worse. And so even if it's something like that where you don't take it often at all, but it helps you feel better to know that you have it, then like that's okay. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to push medication. I know there's a lot of people that are anti-medication, but all I'm saying is you have to do you, and if it's something that you've tried and it's helped you, like that's okay, and don't beat yourself up about it, because just like any other part of your body that's sick or hurt or broken, you're just doing what you need to do to help fix it. So this video still wound up being really long. I think that it's much more thought out and less rambly than the first time I filmed it. So I got very open with you guys today. Not a lot of people know that stuff about me. That's it for this video. Let me know if you guys liked it. I can do more anxiety related videos as things occur in my life if you want. I can talk about how I am feeling postpartum and how my anxiety has changed once the baby's here, and I'll keep you guys updated on it basically throughout my pregnancy updates. So make sure you're subscribed so you see those, and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye! Hey guys! Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. And today's channel, that's called video. This baby is kicking me right in the bladder right now.